for the younger kids. We'll get to the recruiting part too. So first, when you're picking your camp, know what you want out of your camp. Is it recruiting, coaching, reps? So I think all three are very different types of camps that are ran. Recruiting is usually you just get shuffled out for you older kids, you get shuffled out onto a field, you get split up into however many teams that they have, and you kind of just get thrown to the wolves. You don't really have any coaching. You barely get a warm-up. You kind of have to find like a player that you kind of trust to warm you up and to drag you along and be like, hey, will you give me a couple shots? The next type of camp is coaching. Is it more fundamental stuff? Is it someone who's there to individualize train you? And then the next type of camp is reps, where you just are seeing thousands of shots in a small amount of time, whether it's a day, 2 days, 3 days. So I think all three of those camps are very different depending on what you want out of it. It depends on what type of camp you should go to. So this player-to-coach ratio, I think specifically is aiming at coaching it, the types of camps that are coaching and rep-orientated. Personally, when I run MN41 lacrosse goalie camps, we always have, on one cage, we can never have more than 4 goalies, and then each cage has their own shooter/coach. So there's never goalies who are kind of left out. I'm never out on the field with 8 goalies, and I'm the only one there, because then each goalie is not getting enough personalized time, not enough reps, not enough. And too many goalies are standing around. I personally think that. So 4-to-1 ratio usually is something that I personally try to achieve. And then the goalie coach, the player-coach ratio. For the goalie coach, do your research. Like, look, don't be afraid to Google search their name. Look, did they play at Division I, Division II, Division III level? Even if they didn't play college lacrosse, what are kind of like their qualifications? Are they new to goalie coaching and this is kind of their first camp ever, or have they done tons of camps? See, do you know anybody who's been in their camps? Reach out to them to see, is it really worth the money that we're spending on this? And then accessibility for how to pick camps. I know whenever there were camps like near me, I would try to go because in Houston, there's not that many lacrosse camps. And then to find maybe a lacrosse camp, if you're looking in the summer, if you're looking next fall, think outside the box on where you can look for camps. Because lacrosse kind of gets expensive, especially when you're not from like a non-hotbed area. But I'm lucky that my grandmother lives in New Hampshire, so we'd go up there for a couple of weeks in the summer. Then you could look up in New Hampshire now for lacrosse camps. Or my other grandma lives in Arizona. Look in Arizona for different types of lacrosse camps. So don't be afraid to think outside the box and use your family members to kind of find camps that fit your needs and fit your wants.
Love it. I put on a camp over the summer, and I was talking to someone who's very familiar in putting on camps, and they mentioned this player-to-coach ratio. And so I recruited a couple other coaches, and it's so important. It's so important because you could set up the drills, but just having, and do them, right? But just having that coach right there with you to watch you do the drill and give you tips and feedback, invaluable. So yeah, I think that player-to-coach ratio, super important.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, if they've been on the Lacrosse Goalie Summit, if they've presented, they're a great coach because I bet these guys pretty hard. And if they're presenting here, they're a great coach. So and we've had a lot of great coaches, Coach Wirt from Pete Goalie, the Goalie Smith guys, Matthew Nunes, MN41. So just tons of great coaches have presented at this summit. So that's another thing you can do for research.
Yeah, so we continue on to that next slide. I think there should be another slide on how to pick camps. Yep. So on camp, don't be enamored with like one key name. I'm not going to call anybody out, but personally I've been to like a camp or two where they say, oh, this pro player is going to be here, or these college players are going to be here, and all they do is they just go sit on the bucket, roll a couple balls out, and they're like, all right, shoot high, shoot low, shoot everywhere. All right, you guys are good. You guys just got goalie coached by X, Y, or Z. I'm not trying to certain anybody out, but I've been there as a player. So when you're looking into it, look, say this player from UVA is coming in. Does Matthew Nunes really coach, or does he just show up and kind of collect the check? So that's another one. And then games versus instruction. that kind of goes back to what type of camp you're looking for. If that camp, all they do is play games and you're not looking for that recruiting level, is that really the camp you want to go to? When I was looking at camps, I was always kind of looking for some instruction, some games, because that instruction you can build into games, and then during the games, that coach can give you specific feedback, which I thought was super helpful when I was at camps.
Yeah. On that second point, coaches just collecting a check. Do you find that to be common?
So I'm gonna use like the Woodlands camp that Coach Kennel used to run down here. There were some years where I'm actually gonna shout out to the Maryland guys, even though they made my life pretty miserable in May. Those guys would come down to the Woodlands and they would help Coach Kennel run a phenomenal camp. They would be super hands-on, bring like a bunch of energy, and be just like make every coaching point individualized, which I thought was super special. And then there was other years where people would show up, they would, as I said, like sit on the bucket and not really do much. Like you don't want sit on the bucket coaches. Those coaches that you see kind of sit on the bucket or who are more enamored with just kind of chit-chatting with the other coaches, that's kind of the ones that you have to be worried about, that or they're coming down to Texas just to collect a check, or they're coming out to San Diego just to collect a check, which I think there's been a couple of camps where I've fallen victim to.
Interesting. I haven't seen it. But again, I haven't experienced as many camps perhaps as you or across the U.S. But I find that being such a small community and
for every place, but I'm going to try to help you find kind of what may fit. So accessibility is another, like just like it was for clubs. Is it in your hometown? Like I'm in the hometown for a bunch of these kids I give lessons to. They drive less than 30 minutes to come work out for an hour with me. You go out of town, like when I was growing up, we would go to Austin or we would go to Dallas maybe once a year and you get individualized goalie training. Or is it national? When I kind of mean by national, I think the example for me at least is like Goalie Smith. You have a lot of people flying out to Goalie Smith, which is they're located out of Baltimore, and that's not very accessible. But that's why their stuff is phenomenal. I personally think, but it's kind of finding that balance of what works for you, and then price for / quality. I don't think any personal training should go for more than 125. I've heard 125, which I think is overall really steep. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say kind of like the base limit is about $20. And then the amount of times you can go in a week. Can you go twice or 3 times a week to a person who's charging $125 an hour? Don't think so. I think it's more realistic where you can go 3 times in a week for someone who charges $30 an hour or $40 an hour. Than that 125. So finding out that balance of how much is this lesson actually worth and the amount of times I can go in a week. And then that last point here is go to different coaches. When I first started playing goalie, my first ever goalie coach was Doug Saran. And some coaches I feel like kind of get protective over kind of their players. And he was the first person who was so supportive of me going up to see Coach Saran out of Dallas, or seeing Coach Platt, another Houston goalie coach, going to Goalie Smith. He was always, and then when I would come back, he's like, all right, what do they tell you? Like, oh, all right, they noticed that because each goalie coach notices something different. Like I promise, like if me and Coach Damon were on the field with you, we each probably would find a couple different things that we were like, oh, maybe we can tweak this, and then Coach Damon may find something different that I'm not seeing. So getting different opinions is like the best thing you can do as a goalie. Like all the different types of goalie coaching, like it's always good to get more opinions on your game. Like I'm still trying to find more and more opinions on my game. Oh, you can tweak this, you can tweak this. Like I think that just helps you become a better goalie.
Yeah. How do you? Question we get all the time is how do you balance those different opinions? Especially as a youth, it can be kind of tough. Like you as a college age adult, I think you're in a better spot to have a conversation with that coach and be like, actually, I've tried that. I prefer it this way. Sometimes as a youth, it's you kind of got to take the coach's word. So how do you balance, when you go to 2 different coaches and they tell you 2 different things?
Yeah, so I was lucky. I had like a hometown goalie guy who I was always able to bounce ideas off of. So like that was kind of how my frame. Like I'm gonna use like when you're building a house, you're playing goalie. Coach Doug helped build my frame, and then these other goalie coaches, they might come in, they might try to put new carpet in or new flooring in. But I would always go back to Coach Doug and be like, all right, this is what he was saying, and then you were able to just kind of have that conversation about your game with somebody, which I think is super important. Being able to talk about how you're playing goalie with somebody is, I mean, it's super important. And then when like a coach from another coach tells you, hey, this is like try this with your hands or try changing your level and stuff, like try. Don't be like you should always try these suggestions that these coaches are saying because you might find something to be super successful for you. I mean, as goalies, we're all different. There's no one goalie that plays the same. Like Blaze Reardon is the best goalie in the world, and me and him play completely different because his body's different than me. His hands are quicker than mine. Like he can get away with some other things that I can't get away with. While I might be get away with something that Charlie, the kid I'm taking a picture with here, like can't get away with. So like each goalie has their own unique style, and it's that style comes from all these different types of coaching.
Yeah, I love that answer. Yeah, when I did my camp, I told the kids, like, I'm a huge advocate of, like, the little hop, patting the feet pre-shot. Huge advocate of it. I think it benefits goalies tremendously. And I said, I want you to try it. Open mind, just 100% all in on this technique for this particular session. It's the summer, right? You don't have a game tomorrow. You're not playing in the finals tomorrow. We're not revamping something where you're going to feel uncomfortable. You may feel a little uncomfortable at first, right? But you're not going to feel uncomfortable in the game. Give it a try. If you like it, stick with it. If you don't like it and you don't want to use it, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, and then like another thing I might add on, like this private coaching, like these private coaches should almost make you feel like a little, or while you're in the goal, they should be if they're making suggestions, they should feel a little uncomfortable. Like my feet were super narrow when I was super young, and then they start getting wider. And when I first started getting my feet wider, it was super unnatural for me. But like that unnatural thing kind of became a new framework for my goal, for like me playing goal. So.
Yeah. One thing I'll throw out too in terms of accessibility is a lot of people say, you know any coaches in name a city, right? A random city. And one of the things that I've done and I've had success with is like, well, is there any D1 schools like where you live? And one of the parents says, yeah, Dartmouth is pretty close. And I'm like, okay, like let's go to the roster of Dartmouth goalies, ping them on Instagram, and see if we can find someone who's interested in giving private coaching lessons. And a lot of goalies are. I mean, we love the sport. We're goalies. Like, who doesn't want to help the next generation of goalies? It might be a time thing where they don't have enough time, okay? But a lot of folks do like to give coaches, and like to give coaching, and that's how you can find a private coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way to do it. Don't be afraid to send
I promise to love you.
Nobody in the world, even if you live close to our parents, say you live close to our parents, don't be afraid to reach out to them. You live close to Scotty Rogers, don't be afraid to reach out to these guys. I mean, I've been lucky enough to meet both those guys in person, and they're like wonderful people. Don't be afraid to reach out to any goalie, and it's kind of like the goalie world. Because everyone should get coaching. Because, like we were talking about earlier on how to pick your club team. There's not that many goalie coaches on these club circuits in your town, so don't be afraid to use your resources if they're there. And then selfless plug, the last goalie rat college training pass. If there's nobody around, those are pretty solid too.
Thank you for that selfless plug. Amazing training. So if you don't know, if you're brand new, I sponsored 17 goalies, including Mr. Matt Nunes, and we each goalie put together a training pack. So it's all virtual coaching, but it is phenomenal. It is sessions like this. It is them out of the field teaching you drills, so you can just watch the drills and then go out to the field yourself and do them. So it's like one of those situations where I learn all this stuff. I take it with me. I don't even need a goalie coach now. I know what drills I'm doing. I still think private coaching and getting the reps out of the field, like no substitute for that. It's just kind of a supplement, right?
Yeah, so I would just say those kind of, for me, when like a goalie coach couldn't come out, me and my dad would go to the field where he would be throwing tennis balls at me, or he'd be hitting like off a tennis rack at me using like the shovel, like just kind of getting those reps in any ways I can. So
I love it. Cool.
So I think there's one more slide.
Yeah, there you go.
Private coaching. So the ability to coach and communicate appropriately. So there's a difference between coaching pro players and high school players, and there's a difference between coaching high school players and like youth players. Each kind of age needs to be able to communicate in a different way. I can't explain an off hip save to like a high schooler the same way I can explain it to a kid who's just starting to play goalie or a kid that's 6 years old. They understand their bodies completely, and making that save in practice, like stealing one in the game, is the most exciting thing ever. So is it fun to go out? You kind of got to be the trial dummy. It was like, go to these tournaments, don't go to this tournament. This camp I thought we want. So have expectations, and you're like playing West Coast Stars, like those guys who I had on pictures are some of my best friends that
you like. Thumbs up it, upvote it, and we'll make sure that we get to it. Sawyer wanted to know, how do you get recruited if you're an older kid, for example, later on in high school?
So if you're later on in high school, so say you're a junior right now, you're going into your second semester of your junior year. I mean, first of all, hopefully your grades are good. You have solid grades. That's always kind of the foundation of being able to be recruited. If you have a low GPA, that's going to knock off over half or 3/4 of the schools that can recruit you. Next, make sure you have a list of schools that you can go to. When I was going through this, I remember Coach Finn and Coach Saran being like, maybe have 2 or 3 reach schools. So reach feel that these schools are Coach Turner, Coach
College next year.
So I just really don't kind of understand. Let me look at